10 years to the day, November 8th, 1952, he became the all-time career goal-scoring leader in the NHL with career goal number 325. Gets better. The one that is the greatest statistical numerical anomaly in the history of the world. The precise moment that Bobby Orr scores that goal that sent him flying through the air after he was tripped by Noel Picard leads to 70 correlations to the number 4. 70 on that Mother's Day, May 10th, 1970. Not going to give you all 70. They're in my book. But I'll give you a few just to give you an example of how this type of configuration works.
I believe this is the guru. This is the man. This is Liam Maguire I'm speaking with right now, live on rawmikeRichards.com.
How are you, brother?
We just played something from one of your series called The Word, where you're going through the number 23. As it pertained after there was a tribute to Pat Quinn.
Pat Quinn,
And the things that you just went through in the last minute, that's why when people say, hey, I think I know as much about hockey as Liam Maguire, here's your answer. You don't. Don't even try it. Don't go near this man. This is not a fight that you want. You're the Drago. You're the Mike Tyson of hockey trivia. Don't get blown up. Buddy, it's unbelievable and so great to have you on the show for the first time today.
Yeah, you know what? I've been following you obviously online, my friend, and since you launched this fantastic venture and seeing all the responses and your fantastic guests, and mentioned to you a few weeks back, or I guess a couple months probably now on Twitter, that I'd love to jump on with you. So I'm honored, given the stature of the guests you've had on. I'm thrilled to be on, and we're from a previous incarnation. We've sat in a studio together numerous times, going back over the years, and always enjoyed it. Mike, you're a great supporter and always helped me promote whatever venture, whether it be one of my books or one of my appearances anywhere and everywhere across this great country and through North America. So I thank you for all that in the past, and it's great to be on with you today, brother.
Well, I'll tell you, we also see on Twitter the Team Canada 72 and the pictures that they've been sending out lately, including ones that are just related to the players. So there was that one when Tampa Bay comes into the league, and there's a picture of Phil there. I mean, certain people's birthdays, pictures of Marcel Dion and Gilbert Perreault. Just it is of that time, and I just played an old clip previously for Dave, who's obviously a Winnipegger, and so we just saw the series with the Red Army in 1977, where you see and hear names like Dave, Bobby Hall,
Alf Nielsen, Anders Hedberg, Joe Daly, guys like that. Lars-Erik Sjoberg at the time, the captain of the Winnipeg Jets. That was a pretty impressive team, wasn't it, Liam?
Well, it was a great team by WHA standards, obviously. They were built on that one line, and you said Sjoberg. I mean, he actually captained them coming into the NHL, and unfortunately the rules, Hedberg and Nielsen jumped to the Rangers the year before the WHA folded. Yep. But that line, those three guys would obviously have not looked out of place as a line at that time in the National Hockey League. People forget when Bobby Hull jumped to the WHA, he was coming off a 50-goal season. He had just recorded his fifth 50-goal season with Chicago. So it wasn't like he was going over there past his prime. He was still good to go. And when he had 70-plus goals in that second or third year in the WHA, would it have been 70 in the NHL? No, of course not. But he would have definitely recorded, I think anyway, at least 2 more 50-goal seasons probably in the NHL. And that was an outstanding line. And let's be honest, when the NHL had the hammer and were forcing the WHA's hand, who had gone through at that point a total of 26 franchises on paper, 14 of which hit the ice in one way, shape, or another, not including transfers and everything else. They had the hammer, and yet the WHA were able to hold serve to a degree and ensure that 4 of their franchises, the strongest ones, including Winnipeg, were able to make the jump to the NHL. We're Winnipeg 2.0 right now, but at the same time, it's just so great to see them back in the peg and playing as well as they are. And they did in the 80s. And if you think about it, the misfortune some of the teams in hockey history have had. I mean, Don Cherry had 11 players on his roster in 1978 score 20 goals or more. No team did that before. No team has done that since. And they lost in the final in 6 games to the Habs. They lost in 77 in 4 straight, and they lost in the semifinals in 79 and 7. They couldn't beat Montreal. And you look at Winnipeg with Dale and the boys, and Winnipeg's tied an NHL record in 1985 with 6 30-goal scorers. Think about it. 6. tied the Sabres and the Islanders, the only two other teams in the 70s to do that in the 1970s. So a decade before, basically. And Winnipeg couldn't get out of that division. You got Calgary going to the finals in '86, winning a cup in '89, and you got Edmonton. What do you do? And that's why I was so disgusted that Dale Hawerchuk was left off the top 100 of all time. What an abject farce and a joke that was. Anybody who saw that guy play knew how incredible he was. And Dave, if you were in Winnipeg and at that era at all, I mean, 70s were a little bit before Dale, but if you were there at all through the 80s and you saw him in his prime, and he was unbelievable. It's a great city.
Okay.
Liam,
you have no idea what can you have just opened up. You know in those science fiction or horror movies where they go, don't open that box. You just opened that box. This is the largest Dale Hawerchuk fan that is on the planet. He has planned his children to be born on birthdays around
my second daughter's born on April the 4th, Liam.
No way, right on. Right on. I love it.
So,
I emceed his golf tournament 2 years ago,
awesome.
and up in Muskoka, and well, you know, the first I was in Ottawa about 12, 14 years ago. It was Dale, Wendell Clark, Bobby Hull, and Kirk Muller.
Oh,
that was the quartet I was with. We did a gig for a charity in Ottawa, and then we were done about 9 o'clock, and Bobby said, "Boys, let's find another location and get her going."
My memories of Dale Hawerchuk basically start as a kid getting out of a Brinks truck on Portage and Maine with John Ferguson and signing that contract. The only other player to do that, of course, as you know, the great Bobby Hall. And Dale's, as soon as you said that, it's like, well, it's no wonder I love Liam Maguire as much as I do, because he's rattling off everything that I thought of at the time. Hey, you know what? One last topic about the Jets, because a lot of people don't know this, and I know you do. It's funny when they do get the expansion into the National Hockey League with Quebec, Hartford, and Edmonton. And when we look at what Las Vegas got for their expansion team and their opportunity to select players, that wasn't the scenario of the Jets, was it, Liam? Like they were stripped down completely. It was almost like putting a naked man in the streets and giving him one wristband, because that's how the NHL actually treated the WHA teams when they actually got the merger into the NHL.
Yeah, it was beyond brutal. They were allowed to protect two players. That's it.
Yeah.
And then after so many were claimed, if there was any dregs left, you could I believe substantiate with a player or two. But you were essentially you just hit the nail on the head. You were essentially a mere shadow of what you were the season previous. And of course, in Winnipeg's case, they had lost Hedberg and Nielsen to the big money in New York the season prior, but they still had a strong nucleus. And if I'm not mistaken, I think their two priorities were Lukowicz and Lidstrom. I think it was Willie and Morris. No, maybe Scott Campbell.
Scott Campbell might
have. Yeah, Scott Campbell. Yeah. He's on Twitter, does a great job.
He does. Yeah, you're right.
Winnipeg. Yeah, he's and he was tough as nails too. He could fight, and I've never actually formally met him, but I've exchanged a lot of messages with him, and I respect him greatly. For one, played in an era where you had to have guts to put a sweater on. But yeah, Scott was a priority pick, right? So they were decimated, and Edmonton keeps Wayne, and that's great. The other one was I believe it was Bent Gustafsson, who they ended up shifting over to Washington. Anyways, everybody got to keep two, and was a mere shadow of what they had as a franchise before that. But that was, like I said, the NHL had the hammer, and the Jets built a hell of a team, notwithstanding, John Ferguson, Fergie did a great job. I mean, he found a lot of talent, but at that time, thinking that Jimmy Mann or Jimmy Kite were first rounders and we're going to be the salvation. I mean, he obviously Dale was a no-brainer, but let's be honest, Fergie had his fingerprints all over that team as they excelled in the mid-'80s. And there's just had the misfortune, just as I said about Boston earlier. And frankly, you can go back in hockey history and see that repeatedly, in not a ton of times, but in other instances where teams were running the day. Like Boston had that same misfortune in the 1950s. They were in the finals in 53, 57, and 58 and couldn't beat the Habs. And well, 53 they lost in the semifinals, but they had a really, really solid team. And you had only 6 teams, but you had Detroit at the tail end of their four cups in 5 years and winning 7 Prince of Wales, and then you had the Habs just absolutely taking off with Geoffrion, Dickie Moore, and Jean Beliveau on top of the Rocket and Doug Harvey and Jacques Plante coming along. So there's just no way, and it just happens in hockey history. So it was misfortune for Winnipeg for sure, but sure love that city. And when I did a gig, one of the greatest gigs of my life, 1999. It's hired by Labatt's. Every single Tuesday morning for 26 consecutive weeks, I was flown to a different part of Canada.
Whoa.
And I was the entertainment that was charged with keeping the people in the sports bar who were there for the TV taping for the national broadcast on Sportsnet that night. So the crowd were assembled. Everyone was on cue to cheer and do all this and that for the broadcast that night. It was taped, but then my job was to keep them entertained until the game actually started. And I did the best one we had at 26 cities. There was 3 that stand out. They put me in a strip joint in Edmonton,
Nice.
which was an absolute mistake.
Nice.
Absolute mistake on a lot of fronts, although I loved it.
Yeah.
They put me at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, and Winnipeg. I was in a sports bar in Winnipeg, and you should have seen the crowd. I actually had to stand on the bar. There were so many guys drilling me with hockey questions, and we drank so much that night. And then we went out that night with a bunch of the guys after. I'll tell you what, I had a fantastic time. So I love that city, man. Absolutely love it.
We're in conversation with Liam Maguire here on rawmikerichards.com, watching either on the website or the dedicated YouTube channel brought to you by DKI. And, you look at things historical, and we will use the word like a dynasty. We'll use the word dynasty, and I think because of the cap era, just because of the dollars and cents and how it works and trying to keep players, that definition, I think Liam has to change a little bit, because you're not going to see, I don't believe, people winning 3 and 4 in a row. Now I realize what Pittsburgh has won, but in reality it's so much hockey, they go so much longer, and trying to keep the players, it is really, really difficult. So therefore, when I look at the Montreal Canadian fans who constantly chirp at us or chirp to anyone who's going to listen, they're either really, really high when it's good and they start talking about all the cups, or it's devastation. Now, if you're looking at that organization and what they need to do in this modern era, forgetting about the Flying Frenchman and everything else, because that's gone, do you think they're at the point, or they should start to consider dismantling it, not unlike what happened here in Toronto? So you've got to get some value for those that are going out the door, which means names like Carey Price come to mind. If you're Montreal, do you dish him before skills start to diminish? Is his value high enough that you'd want to do it now?
Well, his contract kicks in next year, so they've signed him to that 10.25, and it's an 8-year deal, as we all know. And depending on how he finishes this season, he played 5 real solid games, and then wasn't really, really sharp the other night, but still made some great saves against St. Louis. But they hadn't faced a team like St. Louis yet this year. That was a wake-up call for them. We'll see how they play against Calgary tonight. To your question, Mike, the thing is, if you are a Habs fan, what's probably frustrating is depending on how old you are, you were there. They were there in the late 90s. After the Patrick Waugh trade, they fell right off the face of the earth. They missed the playoffs 3 out of 4 years in the late 90s. And it was, it was a challenge. Scoring was down. The team was decimated. You're being led by Martin Ruzinski. It just wasn't a good time. They rebuilt, and they draft Jose Theodore. So again, they get a strong goalie, wins the Hart Trophy, wins the Vezina. Sound familiar, right? And they built a team, started to look like rebuild. Had some draft choices. You had Saku Koivu approaching his prime. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. You had a number of key infrastructure players that were really contributing to the team. You pick up Bob Gainey from Dallas, who goes to a 5-year plan, and it looks like they're heading in the right direction. And then Gainey's daughter dies right on the boat. She disappears into the ocean on a black night. And there's Bob out there, God love him, imagine, in the Atlantic Ocean on a boat trying to find his daughter. And he was never the same after that. And Pierre Gauthier takes over as GM and absolutely decimated the team. And if you look at Bergevin coming in 6 years ago, again, another guy with a 5-year plan. Well, they peaked, right? They hit that pinnacle in 2014. They make the semifinals. You got Carey Price kicking out BBs, and then Kreider runs them over in game 1. And Tokarski comes in. They lose the series to the Rangers. They don't go to the finals, and the Rangers lose in the finals to L.A. in 5 games, 3 of them in overtime. So they were right there. And that's where this particular group, led by Carey Price in his prime, even though he had the season that he did, as we all know, a couple of years ago, maybe one of the best, most dominant seasons in goaltending history, still, that was their pinnacle right there, 2014, 2015, and they haven't been able to. So to your point, is that something they should possibly consider? Well, here's the challenge there. I don't know that you can task that to Marc Bergevin and Rick Dudley and Martin Lapointe and the group, the veteran group of assistant GMs that he has assembled there, that he largely brought over from Chicago, almost every one of them, all former players. I don't know that you can task that group led by Bergevin to do that, Mike. I think it may come at the expense of Bergevin's job, which I know a lot of Habs fans wouldn't be disappointed in right now. And you may say, if they miss the playoffs this year, which is a very strong possibility, they have dug a massive hole, because it's these games in hand that everybody has are a huge albatross for them right now. So any loss is really magnified. And 5 games in a row, that's great. It's got to be 10. And that's likely not to happen. So there's still a strong possibility. If they miss this year, yeah, that's what they should do. They should probably look at gutting this thing and trying, and whether that's a possibility. Now, Carey has no trade. He has no movement. So he's got to agree to anything. Now, would a team take him? I think so. I think if they went to him and said, Carey, we want to gut this thing, would you waive it? And he probably would. But that's what it would take, and I don't know that you could task Marc Bergevin to do it. Now, I live here in Ottawa, and Ottawa did that. They went to Eugene Melnyk, who's a train wreck on a good day, went to Brian Murray, God rest his soul, and said, when the Sens were sucking there about 5 years ago, and they said, this is post Stanley Cup final in 2007, and he said, that's it. And in February, before the trade deadline, he moved out Chris Kelly, he moved out Mike Fisher, 2 key components, 2 incredibly popular guys on the organization, and they began the process of gutting the team. And you know what? They've never recovered. They've never recovered from that. They went to the semifinals last year. I know you're saying, Liam, what about last season?
Yeah.
They won 6 games in overtime. They snatched victory from the jaws of defeat literally 5 times. I mean, Game 5 against the Rangers. Are you kidding me? That happens once a decade. Once a decade, you're scoring 2 goals in the last 90 seconds to force OT and then winning in OT, and the same guy got all 3 goals. That happens once a decade, folks. So, they've never – it's been a revolving door of coaches, and Ottawa's a different story. But they did that, Mike, and it didn't work. And you're careful what you wish for if you're a Habs fan. But that's the immediacy of the world we live in today. Everybody, whoever you cheer for, if they have a bad period, you know all about it because Twitter blows up. And you want everybody gone. Heaven forbid you lose a game. Everybody knows the line combinations. Everybody is saying that Mike Babcock can't coach, or that triumvirate that's running the show, Lou Lamoriello, is just getting more balled, if that's even possible. He doesn't really know what the hell he's talking about. And they say that about all their teams, no matter who they cheer for. And the overwhelming majority of them that comment like that can't even skate. Yeah. They never played a competitive sport beyond the age of 12 in their lives. Somebody in grade 7 with a hockey sweater stole their lunch money, so they got a hard on for the sport, and they think they know what they're talking about, and they don't. And that's the world we live in today. So in Montreal's case, do they gut this thing? Well, frankly, they were there in the late 90s, and they rebuilt, and they've been there. Can they do it again? Should they do it again? Yeah, you know what? If they miss the playoffs this year and they do it and do so as a relatively healthy team, then yeah, I think they should.
Liam, you mentioned the Ottawa Senators, and I wanted to bring up Matt Duchene. I've lived in the city of Ottawa, and I know the media covers the Senators because it's the number 1 ticket in town, and rightfully so. It's an NHL team. What sort of heat is the Ottawa Senators management under for that Duchene trade, considering that he's been there for about a month now, and he scored 1 goal?
Guys, it's so hot right now in this city, and then losing last night, getting shut out again, and they played an okay game. Mm-hmm. They really did. They just couldn't find a way to put one in. But right now, they're not getting the goaltending, and it wasn't horrible last night. I mean, Anderson was okay, and It's Carlson. Carlson's a mere shadow of himself right now. He's got no mobility. He can't push off that ankle, that foot, whatever the operation was. And the trade, Dave, the trade is killing Ottawa right now. There's no doubt about it, because not only did you give up Turris, but here's the thing: what people don't know. Okay, I'll tell you right now. That trade was not a hockey trade. That trade was a business trade. At the time, on paper, I didn't mind it, and here's why. I'm not going to be a Sunday morning quarterback here, or a Monday morning quarterback, I should say, and a hypocrite. At the time, I didn't mind it, and here's why. You got Stone, you got to re-sign this year. You've got, on July 1st, 2018, you have to offer Erik Karlsson a new contract. Now, that's somewhat, we can sort of put a bit of a bit of an umbrella on that for the moment, because let's see if, when he rekindles his superlative superstar form. If he does not, it changes the schematic of the money you got to throw at him. But at the end of the day, I believe that they do have to offer him, which is just what Montreal did this year, right? They signed Carey Price on July 3rd, I think it was, whatever,
Yes.
a couple days after it was optioned. Now, that money kicks in next season. He's on his existing contract this year. So the money you offer Erik at the end of this season will kick in the next year. So if they signed Kyle Turris, or tried to, now the Turris camp wanted minimum 6, preferably 8-year deal. Weren't going to settle for less, it sounds like, than 7 here in Ottawa, and wanted upwards of $7 to $8 million a year. There was no way he was getting it here. Okay, I know what you're saying. He goes to Nashville, he signed 6 over 6. Yes, but that was after the trade was done. Here to stay in Ottawa, he knew where he was in the pecking order. He did not have a good start to the season. His play was down, and Dorian moves him, frees up, that brings in Duchesne. Duchesne's contract ends in 2 seasons. So regardless of what you do with him, his money is off the books when Karlsson's money kicks in. At that point, you will have signed Stone, you will have made a decision on Ceci, and you will have either signed or moved Brassard. There's no way, even if the cap went to $80 million, all things being equal, that you have to give Erik somewhere between 11 or 12. There's no way you could fit everybody in. So he moves Turris to ensure that in 2019, he's got the money when Erik's kicks in, and he can fit in everybody else. He knew he was going to lose somebody. So he bought himself the most important commodity at that time, which was time. And he gets back what, on paper, we all thought was a decent center. He's 2 years younger than Turris. He went 3rd overall like Turris. He's a previous member of Team Canada. He's a previous 30-goal scorer. Everything should have fit. The last piece to the puzzle was all he had to do was go out and play. And instead, he absolutely craps the bed. And that's what he's done to this date. And it absolutely is coming back on Pierre Dorion and the Senators right now tenfold. It looks terrible because he's gripping the stick. He can't buy a goal. He's not going to the net with the same ferocity. The team is choking the stick big time, and he's a part of it. And it's a mess right now with him, an absolute mess. But that's why that trade was made. It was not a hockey deal. Pierre Dorion didn't wake up one morning and say, I got to get Matt Duchesne. How do I get Matt Duchesne? No, he knew he was going to lose Turris, because keep in mind, Turris is unrestricted at the end of the season. If he doesn't sign, he's unrestricted. If you hit the trade deadline and you haven't moved that guy, you risk losing him at the end of the year, because he wanted 7 or 8 years. He wasn't going to get that in Ottawa.
Right.
So he's got to make a deal. So that was an economical financial deal, and it's turned around, and it has bit them in the ass big time, because Duchesne has been absolutely terrible.
Well, Liam, you also bring up a point, too. Sometimes I call it sport math, where something should equal something if you put those things together. And there's many people in many different sports who are really good at it, but even they, at times, have to admit, even when the math looks right, if someone, again, is going to shit the bed or do whatever, there is nothing you can do about it. The math should have been right, but it ends up being wrong, and it's just one of those
That's
things
right.
that happens, right? There's not, what are you going to do about it? You think Ryan Leaf is going to be, or the greatest quarterback, or Matt Leinart? All the math looked good. It was all there, but it's still, it comes down to those individual moments, and if it doesn't work, man, it doesn't work, and you can do nothing about it. Nothing.
Well, look, the Edmonton Oilers drafting first picks overall and then trade them a few years later. But keep in mind, they're not the only team to do that, right? I mean, the Quebec Nordiques drafted first overall 3 years in a row. And when Colorado, the former Nordiques, won the Stanley Cup in 1996, not one of those three guys were there.
Yeah.
So it's Owen Nolan, Matt Sundin, and Eric Lindros were all moved. Now, the Lindros one's well documented, but the other two were moved out too before Colorado won that Stanley Cup. And they were first overall picks in 89, 90, and 91. And Edmonton's gone through the same thing. Washington took Greg Jolly in 1974, first overall. I think they'd like a do-over. I mean, it's go down the line, right? You could cite examples in all sports, up and down and all around. And you're right. Unfortunately, the buck has to stop somewhere because it hits the wall, right? Yep. It reverberates. It's like a shot coming off the backboards. And right now, that's on Pierre Dorion. Goes back to Dave's point. I mean, the temperature is so hot here in Ottawa right now. Now they're going in to play LA tonight. You kidding me? And then they got San Jose, and then you got to come home play a Sabre team. Can't get a win to save their lives. They're probably licking their lips to get this wounded bear. And it's a mess here right now. And look, it's going to probably cost Boucher his job. The guys aren't buying into the 1-3-1 anymore, and that's his MO. He did it in Drummondville. He did it in Tampa Bay. He did it in Hamilton. Everywhere he's done it. He's had a phenomenal first year or two, and then it absolutely craps the bed. And this is his MO because he's so stubborn. I guarantee you right now, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'd be willing to bet money on it, that Pierre Dorion had to go to Guy Boucher and say, look, Thomas Chabot is playing, okay? He's playing next game. Now, we didn't bring this guy up from Belleville to sit in the freaking stands. So he's playing next game, and he's been one of their best defensemen. It's just such a colossal, cluster, what here right now from Heartbreak Ridge there with Clint Eastwood, and it's a mess here right now, man. It's a mess.
Well, you know what makes things better, Liam? Going to Maguire's pub and having yourself a wee drink. That's the magic right there. And I said for years, if people are fans of this show, when they come up and see you, they get their first drink. This is what I know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mike, I've said that on your show for years. God love you, buddy, for remembering that. We had so much fun in the studio at different times, as I said at the start of this interview. And anybody listening right now, I do have a pub with my name on it here in Ottawa on the east end of the city. It's called Liam Maguire's. I'm online. I'm very easy to find on Twitter. It's Liam's_hockey. You send me a message that you're coming into town. I'll meet you there, and the first round's on me.
Look at this.
Oh, the best.
You'll see Dave Bastel there tomorrow. It's free.
I'll see you there. You let me know you're coming in.
Hey, Liam, you're so awesome. Thanks so much for being on the show. We got to do this on a regular basis. Really miss you, pal. It was wonderful having you on the show today.
Likewise, Mike. And listen, buddy, continued good health. You're absolutely ripping it. I'm so thrilled that you have got this going, and it's a real honor to be on and a real pleasure to talk to you again. Please have me on again. I really enjoyed it.
Take care. We'll talk to you soon, pal.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Liam. That
is Liam Maguire. You heard it here. Just send him a message. He's online. Send him an email. You getting free booze.
Yeah.
What? We just become best friends?
Yep.